Thanks.
Hello, this is Daryl Justin Black, and for this week's discussion, I will be talking about using the JSTOR database. Using the JSTOR database, I found 3 journal articles that caught my attention. These 3 articles examine the view of Napoleon held by 3 influential 19th century writers and political theorists, Thomas Jefferson, Friedrich Nietzsche, and Stendhal. The first journal article is entitled Stendhal and the Lesson of Napoleon. It's by Dennis Porter. Dennis Porter was a professor at the University of Massachusetts Amherst who completed his PhD in French literary studies at the University of California, Berkeley. He was the Germain Brie Professor of French Studies, published 3 academic books, The Pursuit of Crime, Haunted Journeys, and Rousseau's Legacy, and translated an important work by French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan. Porter examines the at first glance paradox of the libertarian thinking Stendhal's admiration for the militaristic emperor. Porter, in his research, studied 2 of Stendhal's works about Napoleon, Vie de Napoleon and Memoires sur Napoleon, which Stendhal wrote after the end of the First Empire, in retrospect with 2 decades between the 2 books. Porter's evaluation of the 2 works is that, quote, what they reveal above all is how Stendhal's better political judgment struggles with his passionate admiration for a man of destiny and how his judgment is ultimately vindicated, end quote. While many men of history are revered with the passage of time, Stendhal sees that Napoleon became a mythic figure in his own lifetime, who as an invincible leader inspired a religious awe in his own soldiers, end quote. The first quote was from the Porter article, page 456. The second one was from the same article, page 457. Porter includes quotes from Stendhal's books and writings, as well as references to Henry Martineau and Del Lido's works. In Stendhal's evaluation of Napoleon, he, quote, is unequivocal in attributing the quality of greatness to Napoleon. He sees him as one of the most outstanding of world historical figures, the greatest man since Caesar, and probably since Alexander the Great, end quote. That's also the Porter article, page 457. Excuse me. The second journal article is entitled Nietzsche's Napoleon, a Renaissance Man, by Nikolai Regent. Nikolai Regent of the Australian National University has research interests that span several human sciences. He has published on various topics in the history of political and economic thought, history of philosophy, and political theory. His articles have appeared in various venues, including History of Political Thought, History of Political Economy, Journal of the History of Economic Thought, European Journal of the History of Economic Thought, History of European Ideas, Global Intellectual History, and English Historical Review. The journal article, The journal article by Regent investigates the genesis of Nietzsche's perspective of Napoleon as a Renaissance man, as well as its significance for Nietzsche's philosophy. Stendhal's depiction of Napoleon had a significant impact on Nietzsche, who was already an admirer of the Renaissance, owing to his friend Swiss historian Jacob Burckhardt. Emphasis is placed on Stendhal's Vie de Napoleon. Within Stendhal's work, Nietzsche recognized Napoleon as the person responsible for the continuation of the Renaissance spirit that had fallen dormant for centuries and resurrected interest in the classical period. Stendhal's Napoleon was a model Plutarchian hero who embodied the ethos of the Renaissance and antiquity. Quote, Nietzsche certainly saw the similarity between Napoleon's esteem for antiquity and that of the Renaissance men. But even more importantly, here he was presented with a near contemporary who properly appreciated and used history for life. Someone who knew how to find in history a nourishing food. It comes from the Regent article, page 329. The impact of Hippolyte Adolphe Taine is also examined since he gave the ultimate impetus for Nietzsche's closing idea of Napoleon as a Renaissance man, as well as assisting Nietzsche in making the connection and realizing the resemblance of Napoleon the man to the Übermensch In German, it literally translates as overman, but I prefer the classical term great man. Then the third journal article is entitled Thomas Jefferson Views Napoleon by Joseph I. Schulem. Joseph I. Schulem of the Department of History of Brooklyn College specialized in the era of French Revolution and Napoleon, including the impact of French developments on other countries. His major publications were The Old Dominion and Napoleon Bonaparte from 1952, John Daly Burke, Irish Revolutionist and American Patriot, 1964, and Liberty, Equality, and Fraternity, Studies on the Era of the French Revolution and Napoleon from 1990. Excuse me. Schulem relied on the extensive writings of Thomas Jefferson to other American political leaders, including James Madison, George Mason, Edmund Pendleton, and William Short, among others. He made use of the Jefferson Papers, the Coolidge Collection housed in Boston, Massachusetts, via the Massachusetts Historical Society, as well as the William Short Papers provided by the Library of Congress. Schulem also examined correspondence provided by the Public Record Office in London. While Jefferson has often been remembered as the Francophile leader of the Republican faction in American politics during the first party system era, Schulem argues that, quote, Jefferson's zeal for the French Revolution was nourished not only by his philosophical beliefs, but also by considerations of practical politics, end quote. It's the Schulem article, page 288. Jefferson believed that a Republican victory in France gave the fledgling American Republic a much-needed friend among the great European powers and added a counterweight to Hamilton's Federalist attempts to establish a parliamentarian form of government in the United States. As the star general of the French Revolutionary Army's victories, facing almost insurmountable odds against the monarchical powers of Europe, Napoleon Bonaparte was originally held in the highest esteem by Thomas Jefferson. Quote, enthusiastically, in 1797, 1798, and 1799, he hailed the successes of Bonaparte as well as of the other French generals. Was not Bonaparte fighting for a Republican America as well as a Republican France? End quote. Schulem article, page 289. Napoleon's subsequent coup d'etat of 18 Brumaire shattered the optimistic view that Jefferson had clung to, and henceforth, quote, Napoleon Bonaparte, the destroyer of the French Republic, became a pariah for Thomas Jefferson. End quote. Schulem article, page 290. Now, Jefferson had no qualms, however, in Jefferson had no qualms, however, in dealing with the, quote, unprincipled tyrant, as he referred to Napoleon in an 1815 letter to Caesar A. Rodney, and, quote, destroyer of mankind, another term he used in a letter to Henry Middleton, dated January 8th, 1813, when it came to the acquisition of the vast territory of Louisiana by the United States via the Louisiana Purchase. Napoleon's coup provided a valuable lesson in Jefferson's mind about the dangers of a standing army. Through Napoleon's sponsorship of the Napoleonic Code and reorganization of the French educational system, quote, Jefferson realized that Napoleon had preserved some of the fundamental gains of the Revolution, end quote. Schulem, page 302. Following Napoleon's abdication and initial exile, Jefferson experienced excuse me, my allergies are killing me. Following Napoleon's abdication and initial exile, Jefferson experienced an about-face in his opinion of Napoleon. When the victorious Allies attempted to reinstall the Bourbons to the throne of France against the wishes of the French people, Jefferson was incensed. Quote, since Napoleon was apparently welcomed by the great majority of the French nation, Jefferson stated, he was no longer a usurper but a legitimate despot. End quote. Schulem article, page 303. Following Napoleon's dramatic escape from Elban exile and the ensuing 100 Days campaign against the Seventh Coalition, quote, Jefferson's sympathies were now wholeheartedly with the cause of Napoleon and France as against the coalition. End quote. Schulem, page 303. Jefferson's return to the pro-Bonaparte camp was as short-lived as the 100 Days themselves, and he ended his life, quote, loathing the Corsican warrior, end quote. Schulem, page 304. Through his research, Joseph I. Schulem demonstrates the complex and ever-changing opinions of Napoleon held by other contemporary world leaders, particularly Thomas Jefferson. I hope you appreciated this video and found it informative. Thank you, and God bless.